Hi, and welcome to this edition of Characteristics of Learners with Disabilities. This segment highlights characteristics of individuals with intellectual disabilities, otherwise known as students with ID or IDD, intellectual and developmental delays. I'm excited to talk to you about this group because it's really where I'm most passionate, to tell you the truth. I started my career teaching students with intellectual disabilities and community-based instruction, and I just have such a great love and passion for teaching really valuable skills to this population of student, and I'm excited to talk to you about it. So for starters, we can talk about some of the prevalence. It is a high incidence disability category where there are approximately 435,554 children in school being identified as having intellectual disability. So this is a group of students that you will probably encounter as a special education teacher, regardless of whether you teach general curriculum or adapted curriculum. These students will be a part of your teaching career. I want to talk about Bobby first. Here I've given a couple of questions for you to ponder as you watch this video, just as an example to kind of spark your understanding of what we're talking about and what are the perspectives of people who know, love, or teach students who would fall under the category of intellectual disability. So take a second and read over these questions and then think about that as we watch the video right here.
Bobby is 7 years old and in the first grade. He has Down syndrome and is fully included in the regular classroom along with other students with special needs. He's thriving in this environment, as his first grade teacher describes.
Both of my special needs children are reading. Okay, they're reading, they're writing, they're participating in every activity that we do. They're beating my regular ed children at games that we play because it's something that they want to do. They're in there. They have something to look up to, something to, go ahead and go toward. And my regular ed children are right there pushing them. They're not, it's strange. You would think that they would pet, and help, and they're not. They're there pushing them and helping them to strive to meet their goals and that sort of thing. So they both benefit so greatly. And I would just be devastated if we went back to the way that we used to be when they are isolated into another room. I feel like they can strive and achieve so much more being in with when the other children.
Bobby's mother couldn't be happier with his placement at school.
They have an excellent inclusive program here. So we don't have to fight some of the battles that other schools have, that other parents are fighting just to have their kids included in a school, in the classroom. So that road has been paved for us, and it's wonderful, and it does make my life easier that we don't have to come in and insist upon the rights you should have anyhow.
Additional teaching support and daily instructional modifications maintain the least restrictive environment for Bobby. In addition to the regular classroom teacher, there are 2 aides and a special education teacher. Lynn White describes how this works.
Basically, what I am is a learning support teacher, and I go into the regular classroom, and I think it works very well with a teacher like Miss Neely, who lets me come into her classroom, and it is her classroom, and work side by side with her and says, this is my classroom, it's open to you. Everything in this classroom is yours. And basically, when we sit down and plan, I know that we are both on the same level. We're both teachers. One of the big issues with inclusion sometimes, as the students with disabilities might be seen, although they're in the regular classroom, they're separated or they're separate. And they don't even have to be separate by sitting at a desk away from the kids. A lot of times a regular classroom teacher might say, well, these are my kids and those are your kids. And I think one of the most important things that the regular ed teacher and the special ed teacher have to do is see all the kids in the classroom as both their kids.
White and Neely plan together. This assures Bobby's instruction is geared toward the goals in his individualized education plan. This IEP is a blueprint for special education. It works from a child's strengths towards annual measurable goals. How do they keep track of modifications needed so Bobby can follow the regular classroom curriculum?
I have a modification sheet for each child with special needs, and like I said before, we go through the activities and we have the IEP goals of each child there with us, or by this time of year we know what the IEP goals are. And we look at the activity and look at the goals, and on each child's modification sheet we write the modifications for that specific child. So when we go back in the regular classroom to work with a child during that day, then the modifications will be there, and we've already planned for them. We've already made the modifications, and they are there in the classroom waiting to be used.
Parental involvement is crucial in setting IEP goals. Bobby's parents take full advantage of this opportunity to participate in their son's education.
We have worked very closely with the school system in establishing his IEP goals and in working as a team to do that, because we know our children better than anybody. And I think teachers need to listen to the parents. At the same time, I know there are things my child does in a classroom that he may not do at home. So that's why it's got to be a team. And although I think from an education standpoint, the teachers can, they know how to set those goals out for each year. They know what that curriculum is. But I think if the parents are given that information before the IEPs and can look through it and work with their children, then they know too that, I know this may be where you want my child to be, but I think he can get here. I think you should challenge him even more. And I think parents are more apt to say that. I want him here. I want to see you push a little bit and let's see where you can go. And so that's why I think it's very important for the parents to be involved and to be educated when it comes to, and I don't mean a 4-year degree, I just mean understanding for that next year what your child is going to be expected to do, and then let's see how we're going to pace out his year and what goals he needs to achieve.
So there we learned a little bit about Bobby, and you can ponder the questions and see how that can guide you through the rest of this presentation. But I want to get back to just the general characteristics and diagnostic criteria for this category. There are a couple of definitions out there that are relevant to schools. The most common are those with IDEA. Remember, that is our federal legislation. And then there is AAIDD. Both of these definitions combine intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior as the two key dimensions of intellectual disability classification. So we have to remember there are two different dimensions. Both of these are scored on a standardized assessment that converts scores to standardized scores with a mean of 100. Therefore, we have standard deviation of 15 points above or below the mean. And of course, 2 standard deviations below the mean is significant and is the starting point for identification of students with intellectual disabilities. With these standard deviations being an identifier, that would mean that a student with an IQ or an adaptive behavior score of 55 to 70 would qualify as a mild intellectual disability, or MID. Students with scores between 40 and 55 are moderate intellectual disability classification, and severe, profound intellectual disabilities would go right along with that at 25 to 40 or less than 25. So, with this being not just a cognitive IQ test, but also adaptive behaviors, those adaptive behaviors have to be shown to identify, to be impacting them across different environments, and it must also be affecting the education performance, and they need specialized instruction to benefit from the education. The definitions do indicate that it has to be determined before the age of 18, and the exclusionary criteria would be, a sensory or physical impairment. If a student has both an intellectual disability and a sensory or physical impairment, then they would be identified and served as having multiple disabilities. If a person has a traumatic brain injury that causes low cognitive skills and adaptive behaviors, they still would be served with as having a traumatic brain injury. Autism spectrum disorder, we're going to cover that in another presentation. And of course, students who have not been given the opportunity to have an education would not be eligible for services under this category. But I want to go back for a second and just talk about adaptive behavior, because that's something a lot of people are not always clear on. This table right here gives you some skills that are related to adaptive behavior. And so conceptual skills would be related to, language and communication, reading and writing, but also the math and how it applies to concepts and life skills like money concepts. And social skills are adaptive behavior, so learning how to navigate and interact socially is something that we use on a day-to-day basis across environments. So these things are also a part of adaptive behavior. And then, of course, practical life skills, daily living skills are also considered adaptive behaviors. The Vineland-2 is pretty much the gold standard for assessing adaptive behavior. And they have different domains: communication, daily living skills, socialization, motor skills, and the optional maladaptive behavior index. And these are some subdomains you can see that go along with that. This is a standardized assessment. However, it is not given one-on-one with the student that is being evaluated. It is what we call a semi-structured interview. It does not require the participation of the individual at all, but rather it addresses the understandings of people who are close with the student that is being assessed. So it would be most likely a parent or a caregiver, but it has to be someone that has frequent contact. But the Vineland itself has an open-ended nature within the interview, and that's what makes it semi-structured, because that promotes elaboration of responses and elicits more information so that responses can't be biased. And some parents may be embarrassed to answer specific questions about what their child can and can't do, or they may elaborate or exaggerate, I should say, on behaviors. So this is a good opportunity to get to know parents and just let them, talk about their day-to-day life, and then that allows the interviewer or you as the assessor to score the student based on what you've learned from that conversation. So it definitely encourages an unbiased assessment. It allows you and the person being interviewed to be open and honest and friendly. It's important when giving this that you're maintaining good eye contact, you're smiling often, reassuring parents, and being very sincere and enthusiastic. And we want to really encourage respondents to ask questions. So the important thing with the Vineland is to establish a rapport, and it gives you a script, so it is standardized. So to tell about the purpose of the assessment, you would say, so we're meeting today, so there can be learning about John's adaptive behavior that will help us gain a total picture of John. And you want to explain what is adaptive behavior to the person. Adaptive behaviors are day-to-day activities that are necessary for individuals to get along with others and take care of themselves. These activities change as a person grows older and becomes less dependent of help of others. But at every age, certain skills are required at home, school, and in the community. And then you go on to talk about the 4 general areas of adaptive behavior and explain those to the parent. And just noting that the motor skills is relevant and normed for children 7 and under. So during this interview, you would emphasize to parents there's no right or wrong answers, and that they should just actually describe what this child actually does, not what they believe the child can do. And there are ways to score them based on what they think the student can do versus what they've actually seen the student to do versus what the student has never had the opportunity to do. So there's really no way to say that he could or couldn't do it. So these things are all taken into account. So it's also standardized and normed because each individual is different, and not all students or people perform the same activities at the exact same age. We all have different developmental timelines. So the norm population would represent that. All right, so just remember that if you're ever given the Vineland, you should definitely read the manual very closely. The interviewer does not read the test items to the respondent, doesn't allow the person being interviewed to see those items. It's a conversation, and there are examples in the book and opportunities to learn how to craft up interview prompts to get the information that you need. So the AAID definitions underscore the importance of considering an individual's current functioning environments typical for that person before making a determination on limitations of intellectual functioning. So they look at support level rather than just those standard deviations of scores, but thinking about what level and amount of support will the person need to categorize and classify them on the scale, which I think is, reading over this chart, is something that's important that we consider, because that's the whole point of our assessments and evaluations, to start planning for students. So we don't want to think of them as a number, but rather we can think of them as the amount of support we're going to be able to provide them in school so that they may benefit from their education. All right, so just a quick note on the prevalence and causes. You're going to read in the materials that are given to you, not only the textbook, but there is a chapter provided to you in Canvas to read over that you can learn more about this. But the cause of intellectual disability is generally unknown, but they are genetic and chromosomal abnormalities that can lead to intellectual disabilities. And some examples of those are Down syndrome, Tay-Sachs disease, PKU, Fragile X syndrome. There are birth defects such as spina bifida, infections of rubella or measles and mumps could, even pre or postnatal, cause intellectual disabilities. There are toxins, drug use by mothers during pregnancy, or lead poisoning of a child consuming lead could cause intellectual disability, and brain injuries. Sometimes lack of oxygen during birth could cause a child to have an intellectual disability. But about 75% of the cases, there's no known cause. And there are certain factors that will appear to increase risk: domestic violence, maternal malnutrition, poverty, lack of stimulation for a newborn. But what are these characteristics of our learners? Well, how are we going to really focus our instruction? So we have to consider that the learning of individuals with intellectual disabilities is going to be at a slower pace, and the learning will be less efficient. Social skill deficits will be seen based on the adaptive skill of the child. Students are often rejected at school because of this, so that has to be addressed. Emotionally, they develop low self-determination, which leads to learned helplessness. Repeated failures or repeated inability to perform independently leads a child to stop trying and expect and rely on others. So we do not want to have a student experience too much failure and then stop trying to learn and be self-determined. And physically, there could be a wide range of physical symptoms, and this can be evident by the way the person looks, or they could just have an increased susceptibility to infections. So what challenges will come using an inclusive model for students with IED? We've watched Bobby's scenario at a young age. It's pretty clear that students can easily be included, and the gap has not quite become so large that it's too difficult to adapt and use universal design for learning. However, as they get older, the goals for the students may become quite different. So it can be more of a challenge to have students in the inclusion model, but continued benefits of inclusion could still be there. What are some of the benefits of the inclusive model? Students have opportunities to socialize and practice those skills with peers, as well as have higher expectations and be able to focus on standards-based instruction and teachers who are qualified to teach to the state standards, as well as just a culture within our community that everyone has abilities, so that can transfer into after school when students are seen in the community, and just having the perspective of that they can contribute and be a part, and a sense of belonging that also is something that goes along with having inclusion in the schools. Now, in terms of specifically for students with significant or multiple disabilities, that supplemental chapter that I referred to being in Canvas gives a list of characteristics that we're likely going to see and how that might impact education. So our students with severe disabilities, although they're defined pretty discreetly, they do still have diverse characteristics, abilities, and needs. So it's important that we shouldn't overgeneralize the definition. However, there are some common characteristics that need to be addressed, so we need to be aware of them. First of all, language skills, from articulation to vocabulary, general expression to being able to comprehend and have a conversation. Language skills are always going to be the number one characteristic and need for these students to have addressed. Attentional ability is going to impact their attending to salient features of the information and the learning, and they need to know what requires their attention. And this can lead to difficulty with observational and incidental learning, which how we in the general population do learn mostly from observation. Now, memory, most likely the area of memory is the short-term memory that's going to be most impacted. So with more rehearsal, students can move information from short-term memory to long-term memory, and that information can be retained. But difficulty with synthesis of skills and information, knowing how to organize information for efficient use can help with being able to make connections, and that can be difficult for students with significant and multiple disabilities, which in turn leads to difficulty with generalization of those skills and being able to use those skills in different environments and adapt those skills to new opportunities. And of course, with self-management, it's very important, but they have little opportunity to practice that, so that's something that should also be emphasized in their education. But before we end this segment, I do want to just address some areas of instruction that need to be addressed and talk about a few of those instructional methods. So basic academic skills, functional reading and arithmetic, learning time, days, calendar, numbers from 1 to 10. We want to address language and communication skills, which includes memory skills and problem solving, and at the level of the child's current ability. We want to promote socialization, which would include self-care and family living skills. Pre-vocational, vocational skills need to start at a very young age, learning good work habits, so that when they become time to transition from school and from special education services, they could have a part-time job placement and some career education. And of course, we don't want to leave off leisure skills, and we still need to make sure that our students can be self-determined and pursue quality of life and leisure skills. So how do we do that? Well, primarily we're going to focus on scaffolding. We want to model behavior and guide students through the stages of understanding with the support that they need, withdrawing that support as they become more independent. Reciprocal teaching is an evidence-based reading strategy for students with intellectual disabilities, basically using scaffolding. So we're going to give the students the supports they need to comprehend. They need to learn to predict, questioning, clarifying, and summarizing text. So they work together with assigned roles. You can look up reciprocal teaching and find examples, might find some interesting videos on that. Cooperative learning is an evidence-based strategy. So students who engage in cooperative learning learn significantly more. They remember what they learn longer, and they develop better critical thinking skills than their counterparts in traditional lecture classes. And students just enjoy cooperative learning more than traditional lecture classes. And they're more likely to attend, and they're going to go on to work on jobs that require teamwork. So cooperative learning really helps our students develop skills necessary for work projects and the social piece of transitioning out of school. And so I've already talked about learned helplessness. Do you remember what that is? How it occurs? Essentially, learned helplessness is just repeated failure for a student, particularly students with intellectual disabilities who need more time to develop and to learn and to remember information and then to be able to synthesize and use what they've learned in various environments. So with lack of success, the students began to lose motivation to try. They just feel like it's impossible. So relying on others becomes a habit, and that is not productive for a person's growth. So how do we increase motivation with our students? Well, as teachers, we need to emphasize our instructional strategies and that they provide errorless learning for our students. So we have to allow the amount of support that they need so they can be successful. And then we decide when to pull out that support when they're going to be successful with less support. So this is often called systematic instruction. And some of those methodologies include time delay procedures. And that's when we tell the students that we would like for them to, complete a certain task or answer a question. They have an opportunity to wait if they don't know the answer. And then as an instructor, you tell them the answer. You give them the prompt that they need to get the answer correct so that then they get approval, and then gradually they will be able to be independent and they won't have to wait for the prompt. We need to break tasks down into manageable pieces for our students. So that is called a task analysis. So taking a task and breaking it down. I'm going to show you an example of a task analysis right here. So this is a task analysis for putting together a bulletin. This would be a pre-vocational skill, teaching to a student to put together a bulletin board at the local church, and breaking it down. Instead of just saying do it, you have each step of the job. And not only that, but in this case, we have given the student support of a visual cue to remember each of these 8 steps. So that's how we promote that errorless learning. So we also want to give other prompts, and we want to give too many prompts or too few prompts. So under the system of least prompts, we would teach students each step of the task analysis, and we would wait for their independent response. And then we would give them more intensive cues, but allowing them to finally get the correct answer and get reinforced for doing so only with the amount of support that they need. We don't want to over-prompt our students, but we want to make sure that we are providing those prompts that they do need. Now, before we end, on this last slide, I have another video because assistive technology is certainly going to be the new and best support that we can provide, particularly with aiding communication for our students so that they can have functional communication, participate in our schools. So we'll have you watch this video on assistive technology as we end this presentation. I thank you for your time and attention here.
I'm going to collect my listening look from every child, please. Oh, I need every eyeball, please. Thank you very much. Now, over at the hexagon table, you're going to be working on breaking patterns into units. There are all these pattern cards right here. Your first job is to make, with the cubes, the exact same pattern that matches the one up here. Once you've made it, you need to break this pattern into 4 units. You see 4 units down here, which means this pattern must be able to break into 4 units.
My role in the education of a child with special needs is I am primarily the classroom teacher, so I am in charge of determining the direction of the curriculum and the methods for delivering the curriculum. The inclusive classroom is a place where all children are included and feel as though they participate in the classroom at a level equal to everybody else.
Jamie is a 5-year-old little girl who is diagnosed with cerebral palsy. She has very fluctuating muscle tone, so sometimes she'll have very high tone and sometimes she'll have very low tone, and so this affects her mobility, it affects her speech, in all aspects of her life are affected by her cerebral palsy. So what we're gonna do, Jane, is we're gonna pick 3 colors. You ready? Pick your first color. Just push on one of the color cubes. Which one do you want first? Push down. Push down.
Yellow.
Yellow first. I would define assistive technology as...
So there's the highlight of some instructional strategies that we can utilize to support our students with intellectual and developmental disabilities and severe and multiple disabilities. I think that the resources are there, and let me tell you, this is such a great group to work with. So I encourage you to take the time to spend with our students. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.